B in your outline. Without love, knowing it all helps no one. Did you notice? Let's read verse 2. We've already talked about the first part. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I am nothing. So hypothetically, here's a man who thinks he knows it all. He's a literal walking Bible dictionary. Have you ever met those kind? You know, they have all the answers you want to know, right? Now, this is particularly common among Christians. We like to flout our Bible knowledge. I call it the pride of rightness. The pride of rightness. We become inflated because we got some Bible knowledge under our wings, and we like to let people know that we have that knowledge. Its cousin is called religious idolatry. It's when we make an idol, brothers, out of doctrinal accuracy. Now, I'm a doctrinal guy, don't get me wrong. Doctrine is important. But when we make it our idol, people can tell that we're really in it for building up a reputation for ourselves and not necessarily for loving people. How do we know when we or our churches get to this point? Let me just give you a few instances. We know we're there when we use people to further our agenda, pad our resume. We know we're there when we're doing that instead of loving them. We know we're there when we display our intellectual and theological superiority to validate our significance. If you ever heard of a preacher, you kind of go, I don't know, this guy's really in it for himself. You know, he's dropping the Greek bomb all over the place and talking over people's heads. We don't want to do that, right? We don't want to flout our Bible knowledge. I'm not diminishing Bible knowledge or theology or anything like that, but people can tell when we're in it for ourselves, can't they? We know we're there when we belittle others. Can you believe what that church down the street believes? Well, you know what? God still loves them, even though they might not agree with our theology. We don't want to inflate our egos by the knowledge that we know. We know we're there when we tell people, yes, I went to such and such, seminary, and I know Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Really? I feel about that big about now. We don't want to do that. We don't want to flout. We know we're there when we do that. And so we can easily become arrogant and puffed up with our own self-importance. George Sweeting, one of the older presidents of Moody Bible Institute, had a quote that I saved, and I would like to read it. It's really convicting. He said, "Too often, Christians are concerned about hidden truth, but indifferent about loving difficult people." Isn't that true? So, we want to be careful in this area. Listen to what Alex Strauch says on this area. He says, knowledge without love inflates the ego and deceives the mind. We have this idea that we're out there ministering and loving people when really we're just inflating our ego and trying to impress people. And Paul says, look, if I'm the greatest speaker and I know it all, I'm a zero if I don't do it in love. And so Paul proposes a better way. He knows that students are drawn to a teacher who loves them. You know that's true. You've had teachers that are trying to impress you, and you've had teachers who really know they're patient with you, they're kind, they let you ask questions. You know what kind of classroom you want to be in, what kind of teacher you want to have. You don't want somebody that's going to try to impress you. Paul knows that students are repelled by this kind of a teacher. And so leaders must be loving, they must be humble, even in our teaching. You know why? Because when we don't, we contradict the very message we proclaim. Isn't that true when we're doing it without love? Roy Zook down at Dallas Theological Seminary says this about this topic. No substitute exists for a teacher's love for his students. Teaching is far more than getting across content. It also calls for communicating a genuine personal interest in love for each student. Think about this when we teach. We're not in there just to get across content. We could play a tape for that purpose. As teachers, we want to be warm, patient, kind, loving with our students. Love makes us, beloved, better leaders and teachers because it makes us humble and modest. When you're in a Sunday school class and you don't know the answer, people know when you're winging it. Just say, you know what, I don't know, but next week I'll have the answer for you. If you did that to me, I'd say, you know what a genuine guy. He's not going to try to snowball me and give me this fake answer. Love makes us servants of our students. When you walk into your Sunday school, or when you walk behind this pulpit, or whatever venue you're in, you're not the big dog on the block. If you're the teacher, you're a servant. We want to connect leadership with servanthood. If you could pick a logo for your church, you know what I would pick? I'd pick an apron. You remember when the Lord Jesus in the Last Supper stood up? He went and got a basin and a towel, and he put the towel around him like an apron. Leadership isn't bossing people around and I'm in charge here and you do what I say. Leadership is servanthood. And by the way, that phrase, do it because I say so, that went out the window when the last apostle died. None of us can say that today. They could. They had apostolic authority. As elders, we should never say, you do it because I'm the pastor, I'm the elder. What we can do now is we can appeal from the Scriptures in a very loving way. But when John died, that phrase went out the window. Listen, how we teach can be as important as what we teach, the manner in which we teach. When you're in your classroom or behind the pulpit, and thank God for my wife, after I preach, she'll tell me, you were a little too harsh there. We got to keep in mind, when we teach, when we're in our classrooms, we don't want to lose our tempers. We don't want to be harsh and scold our students or give the idea that we know it all and you down there, I'm here to help you. That turns people off. We want to be loving, humble, patient, kind, servants to our students. One of my all-time favorite quotes on this is by a man named Wilson T. Hogg. He was the first president of Greenville College. See if you agree as I read this. Tenderness, isn't that a cool word for leaders? Tenderness will win hearts so hardened that nothing else could move them. Truth spoken in love goes directly to the heart of the hearer and calls forth a kind response. It overcomes prejudices and hardness. It melts and wins where the most logical argument, the most terrible warning, and the severest threatening will produce no more impression than the falling of dew upon a block of granite. Isn't that true? Have you ever been in a theological argument, and you see the veins bulging and the guy's pounding and he goes to DEFCON 5? We don't want to do that. We want to be tender. We want to be loving. That is what will help people. Proverbs 16:21b. And this is key for an elder. Listen to what it says. Sweetness of speech, I love this. Sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Isn't that true in our lives? I'm drawn to a teacher who's kind and who's loving, who's tender. If you got somebody in there that's trying to impress me and scolding me, and I can't believe you don't know that you've been saved for 20 years, sweetness of speech, right, increases persuasiveness. Brothers, we don't want to have a big head and a small heart. Let me say it this way. We don't want to have a theology that is as clear as ice and twice as cold. We want to be warm, kind. That is the path of one who has knowledge without love. You see, isn't it true? It's a lot easier to be orthodox than to be loving. We need to be aware of that. It takes effort. It's easy to have right doctrine. No, that's wrong. It's easier to be orthodox than it is to be loving. Francis Schaeffer had a huge impact in my life. I'm sure you know about the ministry that him and his wife Edith had. over in L'Abri. Listen to what he says. We must ask, and I got to tell you, this is convicting. We must ask, do I fight merely for doctrinal faithfulness? This is like the wife who never sleeps with anybody else but never shows love to her own husband. Is that a sufficient relationship in marriage? No, 10,000 times no. Yet, if I am a Christian who speaks and acts for doctrinal faithfulness, but do not show love to my divine bridegroom, I am in the same place as such a wife. What God wants from us is not only doctrinal faithfulness, but our love day by day, not in theory, mind you, but in practice. Isn't that convicting? We have our doctrinal accuracy, but if we're not loving the Lord and not loving others, what does Paul say? Zero. We're zeros. And so Paul's point is that a loveless pastor or a loveless teacher is a zero. Letter C in your outline. Without love, risk-taking faith is worthless. This is in verse 2. So the third spiritual gift Paul represents is faith. So he imagines himself possessing the most excellent gift of faith imaginable. So as to remove mountains. Can you imagine? That would have been a gift that would have impressed the Corinthians. Paul would have been a spiritual powerhouse, a spiritual risk-taker, a virtual George Mueller, known by all. He's got all of this faith. And Paul says, you know what though? As good as that is, if you do not have love, doesn't matter. You're a bunch of noise. But when we combine that great faith with love, then we honor God and we serve our fellow man. Letter D. Without love, giving all of one's money to the poor is unprofitable. Paul next considers giving away all his worldly possessions. Here's a guy that's going to give away his home, his property, his furnishings, his savings. Surely this is the ultimate action, right? Paul says, no. As good as that is, you could do all of that. You ever seen people put their money in the offering box? They look around. They want to do it to impress people. You know, in the Bible, Ananias and Sapphira did that, didn't they? Did they really give their money because they loved the Lord and they loved the poor? Absolutely not. They did it to pad their agenda, to build a monument to themselves. They were like the trumpet-blowing Pharisees. They gave to receive praise of other people. And so their love was hypocritical. And Paul says, you can have all of these gifts. And then finally, letter E. Without love, the ultimate sacrifice of one's life is pointless. Verse 3b. Paul envisions himself as the ultimate hero of the faith. He's going to lay down his life. Wouldn't that impress people? Wouldn't that impress the Corinthians? Here's a guy that's going to go to the lions. Wow, what a Christian. And Paul says, you know what? Hold on. Even doing that, without mixing it with love for God and love for people, is zero. Can you imagine, as Paul's letter is read in the Corinthian assembly, what they were thinking? Paul's teaching was so in conflict with what they were practicing on the ground, I would have liked to be a fly on the wall to see what they were thinking when Paul's letter about this love was read. And so their pride of knowledge, all their miraculous gifts would have been nothing without love. So this is key for us leaders. We can have all this gifting, and the point is, if we don't mix it with love, we're nothing. We're like a bunch of noise.